Hi folks, in today's video I want to talk with you about variables in JavaScript. So imagine this pseudocode when you have some counting logic, and what we will count, let's say apples. And we have two persons that will tell us how many apples they have. So the first person tells you, hey, I have 5 apples. And the second one tells you, I have 3 apples. So we need to write some logic which will be counting these apples and will be returning the sum of them. So in this case 5 plus 3 will be 8. You may say, well, 5 plus 3 is 8, and it's obvious. Of course it is, because we humans are used to remember stuff, and we don't need to say it to our brain explicitly to save the variable. No, you just subconsciously do that. But in programming, you need to do that explicitly. How do you think we would do that in this sum counting logic pseudocode? We need to remember the 5 and 3, so these pieces of information, to actually add them together and somehow return 8. So when you write a program, you may say it to give you a free memory space. Program will ask your computer to allocate this memory to you, because when you need to store something, even on your computer, it should be stored somewhere physically, as in our brain. In our case, data will be stored on the hard disk, on your solid state drive. And when you tell your program to allocate some memory, well, usually you don't say that, because you just declare a variable. In JavaScript, when you declare a variable, you tell your program to allocate some space for you. Your computer tries to find some free space, and it will give you a physical address, so you can assign some data there. In our case, we need to store 5 and 3. So we store 5 on the empty memory block, and we store 3. Let's see how it will look like in practice. In JavaScript, you have 3 reserved keywords you can use to declare a variable. It is var, let, and const. Simply put, you just use one of those keywords, you name your variable, you put the equal sign, and then the data you want to store. It could be numbers, it could be strings, like this. Let a equals string. It could be object. But in our case, with the apples example, we have 2 persons that tell us this information. How many apples do they have? The first person has 5 apples, and the second person has 3 apples. So if we run this code, we will see 8. So we wrote an actual logic to count the apples. So you may see that we also can use a var keyword, but usually it's not preferable, and why, it's a whole different topic for the video or an article, but usually I don't recommend using var because it may cause some issues you may not even aware about. So just use let or const. You use let when you need to manipulate with your data, when you actually need to change the data in the variable. So let's say we declared let a is 5, but then we decided we want to change that to actually 4. So in this case, if you run a plus b, it will be 7, because for the first time the a equals to 5, then a equals 4, b still equals 3, and when we have 4 plus 3, we get 7. For those who still don't know, a console log function, the console is a global object, and log is property, a function that allows us to debug something, to output something in our console. In this case, I use a website that just simplifies the stuff, because usually in browser you should explicitly open the console. So let is for changing data. In this code, since we don't, for example, we don't reassign the variable, we could use, and it's preferable to use const. So the basic rule is, when you don't need to change your data, use constants. In other programming languages, constants are really constants, and you can't really modify the data. But in JavaScript, Constants are usually applicable for primitives. They don't really constant for objects and other complex data types. If we have, let's say, const a object, let's name it better. So in logic of the constants, we can't really do like car speed 50. We just changed the property speed. However, the car object is a constant. But what does really constant means is that you can't reassign the object, so you can just do it like here. In our case, we don't just change the speed property, but we want to reassign the whole car object. It's not possible. So we get the type error because we assigned the constant variable. We want to change the first number in the numbers array, so we will, let's say, -1. We just changed it, so it's -1, 2 and 3. But if you want to change the whole array like this, -1, just 2, it's not possible because numbers is the constant. But you can modify the properties, and you can also modify the array, the constant array, by indexes. So what to do if you don't want, for example, to change the objects? Let's say you have an object and we don't want to really change that. If you run that code, of course we will have John, right? Since we don't use the console log anymore, we will not see the output. We don't have any errors, at least. We don't want to change this object. So we do object freeze. So now, as we have object freeze for the object, our program won't give us any error, but if we log it to the console, we will see that the name is Bill, it's not John. However, we just changed it after so we declared the variable obj, constant variable obj, and it does have the property name, which is Bill, and then we changed the name to John. And when we output that, we still have Bill because of this property, object freeze. Use object freeze when you want to freeze your objects. Let's talk about also naming conventions. You can, for example, use numbers at the start to declare a variable. One in this case is invalid token. You can use any string to declare a variable, but it's preferable to use, so you may see that someone writes like that. You can see that in Python, for example, but in JavaScript we prefer to write in the, not in the snake case, but in the camel case, my first num. Also, we want to name our variables so they can be understandable. Imagine you are not only one who worked on this project, and you return it back to your project and you see something like this, and you ask yourself, what does it mean? And we don't know really. Also, one rule to follow is name your variables so you can understand them, and not only you, but other people. So if you want to make a variable with your name, a constant variable in this case, you just say my name, let's say Bill. And if you want to make your age, you just name it age or my age. Usually this is all you need to know to start coding variables in JavaScript, so it's just so simple. So let's write a function that will be counting some two numbers. In our case, we were counting apples, but let's just sum any two numbers. Let it be 5 and 3, so we could have 8. And it looks like this. So we declare a function named sum, and it has two arguments. And two arguments means that function can have some inputs, which are n1 and n2, which can be numbers. And we declare the constant variable result, where we say that the result equals to n1 argument plus n2 argument, and then we return the result. So it looks simple. Let's see how it works. So we call this function with arguments 5 and 3, and the result of this function should be written to the console output. We have 5 and 3, and 5 plus 3 is 8, so it works. Okay, let's change, for example, -2 and 2. 0. Yeah, so it seems like it works. So in arguments you can call them whatever you want. It can be a plus or b, it doesn't matter, but usually name the arguments so you can understand what do they mean. So it's still the same. Also, you may not store the sum of these two numbers in the result constant variable. If you want to, I made this just for but if we need to do some manipulation, not just only sum two numbers, we may have to store and have more variables than we think. For example, const sum will be number 1 plus number 2, and then let's say we need to multiply sum by, let's say, 10. Then we need to return the result. So it looks like, that makes it like 5 and 10. 150. Why? So the first number is 5, second is 10. So here we will have 15, right? And then we take the 15, we multiply it by 10, so it will be 150. Of course, you can also write that in one line, like number 1 plus number 2, then multiply it by 10, and it will also work. The thing is to use or not variables. It's up to you. If you want more readability, just use variables more if you wish. If not, if you think that we still can understand what does this one-liner do, well, there is no need to use variables. That's all for this video, folks. Thanks for watching, and see ya.